Welcome to the Week 6 recording. Week 6 goes from February 11th through 17th. And you can see that Week 6 is the beginning of the interface unit. But Week 6, we're only covering sections A through C. So sections D and E will be covered in Week 7. So it's kind of a little bit of a short week, which will give you a chance to catch up on other work. One thing I want to do before we jump into that work, remember I posted a passing plan, so you can click here and it'll show you the work that you can do to earn about 603 points that would be passing for a D. And as you know, we are in the 6th week, so we're more than halfway through the class, and if you're behind, you need to catch up. If you have less than 50% in this class, you need to work hard to get caught up. And you might be able to do it this week since the week does have a little bit fewer work. But you can see on Tuesday, the lesson recording and the Class Connect write-up, of course. Then you have a couple of quizzes through section A and B quizzes. Then for Thursday, as always, we're not doing the discussions. Then you have another quiz on Thursday. So there's no work for this week. So you could get this write-up done in about a half an hour, and you could probably, with the quiz previews, you could do well on these quizzes, get those done in another half an hour, and then you could devote some time this week to get caught up. So please get caught up. All right, week 6. So I'm going to scroll on down, and week 6 is the interface unit. So if you look at the interface unit, you can see that what it talks about is that, before we've talked about like theories of game design, development, and mechanics. Now we're going to look at another part of the mechanics, which is the interface. An interface is how you relate to the game and through what devices. And also later on in section D and E, next week, then you'll use multimedia fusion. But in this whole unit and all of this, you're going to look at accessibility and game interfaces, the types of interfaces, distinguish and comprehend the types of game platforms, know and distinguish between popular genres and the interfaces that go with those genres, look at game ambience and sound. And of course, these last two, those are going to be sections D and E. So not this week. Remember, don't pay too much attention to this because I've changed the points within the grade book. That's where you want to go to check on points for assignments. And just a little warm up, think of how the look and feel of games has changed in respects to the different generations. You can go back and look at the old Pong games and how the look and feel of that has changed dramatically to what games are these days. All right, section A. And we're going to start talking about usability features. And before we do it, of course, I want to get into the write-up. And the write-up says, what is the interface of a game and what are the 3 main areas to keep in mind in developing the game interface? Well, the interface is the link between the user and the game mechanics. So essentially, it's the link between the user and the game itself. And the 3 main things about interface is the accessibility, the understandability, and the consistency. So those are the 3 things to keep in mind, and we'll study more of those further as we move along in this unit or in this section. So that's the answer to that Class Connect write-up question. In this section, we're going to describe accessibility and understandability of interfaces and look at consistency and guidelines in gaming interfaces. So accessibility. So accessibility is the ability of somebody to get to something or use something. And of course, with Section 508, which is the disabilities laws and things like that, it's important that things are accessible to everyone. Now, there's no law that says games have to be accessible to everyone, but the more accessible games are to people, then obviously the more usage you're going to have. But of course, the more work it takes to create those games. So if we go look at the Class Connect write-up question, let's see what it says here. Why is accessibility important in game mechanics? So accessibility is important in game mechanics because it ensures active participation. So accessibility is important because it ensures active participation. If a game is accessible and different parts of it are equally accessible, then people are going to use it. People are going to play the game. Now, there are certain challenges that people have that game designers need to think about. Visually impaired people, people who can't see very well, a game could have voiceovers and it could have text with precise or sound text with precise directions, or it could have text could increase in size to make it more readable. So those are some things that could help people. Players with auditory disabilities, meaning they can't hear very well, subtitles can help them, and also you can avoid audio as a primary game cue. So imagine you'd have if you can't hear, but if the game is designed so that when you look at the screen you see everything you need to do. So two things that can really help people who can't hear very well is that actually it's really these two things: avoid audio as the primary cue and rely more on visual elements. So those are the two things. And the reason I mention that is because that's the Class Connect write-up question. So if I go back to this, it says right here, what are two ways in games address the need of auditory disabled? I just said that, right? So more about people with disabilities. Motor and speech disabilities. So motor disabilities would be maybe trouble using their hands or their fingers. So you could use different types of input devices like mice, keyboards, joysticks. You could have voice activated input, different things like that. So you just reduce the number of actions that people need to use with their hands by clicking and moving a joystick. That makes it so much easier than people having to move their hands around a lot. People that can't communicate through speech very well, they have trouble with gaming, but they're it's really not a major setback. But you can, like this game right here talks about, you can play games without speech. This limits the playability a little bit, but still people can play games to a certain degree. Cognitive process. This be people who maybe have learning difficulties. So of course you can do many different things. You could have different levels of a game, right? You could have people have trouble reading and writing and spatial relativity. You don't want to have complicated menus. Have very simple menus for those types of people. So simple structures of the game, simple and simple narration, so that people can understand that stuff. So really, it's a good idea to have different levels of games, or even not even levels. You could have different ability levels of games. That's really different than levels like we talk about, where you go from basic level all the way up to champion or master level. You could have different ability levels in games. Understandability. So complex gameplay needs to be understandable, because if people don't understand it, it won't be successful. Interface needs to be easy to use, like Wii and those types of things. So those are the things that are really important. But making things understandable, and I think I had a question about that. Let's say here, I'll explain why consistency. So we already covered that. So consistency is so people know what to expect. Actually, we're going to get to that. So here's a little practice activity. So go through this, see what you've learned. And now here's consistency. So why is consistency important? Well, consistency is important. You can see this talks about if you listen to jazz and then all of a sudden it's interrupted by an unrelated event like a commercial or something, that can be unsettling for a person. Well, imagine if you're engrossed in a game and then something unusual happens within the game isn't consistent. If there's a stutter in the game that can destroy your immersion. So consistency is important in games because it allows people to stay immersed in the game. So with consistency, people will stay immersed in the game, and they will continue to play the game, right? Okay, these are some of the things we talked about in this unit or in this section. And then there's the features quiz, and as always, I don't have them posted yet. I'll have the quiz previews posted right over here for you. Okay, move into section B. Section B, now why do we need to think about interfaces? So let's go back to the Class Connect write-up. There's 4 types of interfaces, explain manual interface and visual. So now we're talking about interfaces. And interfaces, again, is the interpretation between the game and the player, meaning how the player interacts with the game. And we're just going to define the types of interfaces. So different types of interfaces. There's manual, visual, platform specific, and genre specific interfaces. So those are the 4 types of interfaces that we have. And here's a little tutorial about interfaces. You can either listen to this or look at the copy of the script. And as we go down through this, you can see it's going to talk about these 4 types of interfaces. So manual interface is closely integrated into the game's hardware in the form of devices such as a keyboard, mouse, etc. So that's manual interface. And then if you look at visual interface, is one that presents lots of on-screen elements. So you can read down through here about active and passive interface for visual interface. But as you can see, so we just talked about what manual interface is up here, and then visual interface. And visual interface is simply that the game has lots of on-screen elements that the person interacts with. Here's a game design activity, so go through that to see what you know. That might help you on the quiz. Then finally the interface types quiz. So that's going to be right over here, the types quiz. So now we're moving into section C. Let's go back to the Class Connect write-up. And section B, we did answer all of these. And now section C. 5 different types of gaming platforms and character creation. So now we're in section C, so we're talking about platforms. Of course, platforms are the way that they're played. So platform is the actual device that provides the interface between you, the player, and the game itself. So the platform is the mechanical device. So you can see down here the variety of mechanical devices. So we're going to distinguish between the different types of platforms and look at platform-specific interfaces. So you can just go through these. It talks about arcade games, and of course some of you probably haven't played the real arcade games, but then the digital arcade games, many of you have played. Obviously you can see Pac-Man, Donkey Kong, Centipede is another one. That was one of my favorites. Space Invaders is kind of a fun one. So there are a lot of old arcade games that have been changed into video games, digital games. Then there are computer games, rely on the heads-up displays with menus and things like that. And then of course your consoles. So consoles would be the boxes, so PS3 and Game Boy, and of course those are old, but all the boxes that you use. Then there's the handheld games and the online. So the handheld games, of course, your phones are turning into handheld games now, don't they? So that's another thing. And phones probably aren't even a part of this curriculum. But phones are making a big change in gaming. And of course, the online games you can play with other people via the internet or via your phone, whatever it might be. Then game interfaces, different components of the interfaces are the scores, the lives you have, the maps. These are all specific to the games that you have, and all those components need to be part of the game interface so people know what they're doing in the game. Lives, powers, and maps, you know all about these, right? The shooter games that many of you play, you know how to pull up the maps, you know how you have the lives. Power you don't necessarily have, but you might have certain weapons and things like that. Of course, the maps you can pull up, and then you'll walk around the rooms and such. So characters and start scenes. And we had a Class Connect write-up question about characters. So explain how character creation is used in gaming and describe an example. Well, what I'm trying to get at with that question is, in games these days compared to older games, these days you can choose your character, right? You can choose attributes the character has and things like that. So that's what I mean by the characteristics that one can choose, the different attributes you can do. So what I'd like you to do on that class connect write up question, if I go back to it, you're going to tell me what character creation is in certain types of games, one that you're familiar with, and give me an example of how you create a character for that game. So that's what I want you to do on that. So you're really not going to find the answer in here, although this is going to talk about creating characters and such, but I want you to think of games that you play to answer that last question. Then finally, the last couple of things, the start screens. Of course, start screens, they're so much different than they used to be. They used to just have buttons that you could click, but now start screens can have where you select your character, select an old game that you've played, the instructions, a tutorial might be on a start screen. So the beginning interface really has changed over the years. So here's a game design activity. Go through that, see what you know. It might help you on the quiz. Discussion, we're not doing the discussions, you know that. And then finally, the last item in section C is the quiz, and I'll again post the quiz preview over there. So that's all that sections A, B, and C have. So not a lot of work. You could probably get through all of sections A, B, and C, including this write-up and the quizzes, in an hour, and then you'll have time to get caught up on old work. And please, please get caught up on old work. So that's all I have for you. I look forward to your work coming in. Bye.